I severed ties with my parents after refusing Mom's egotistical demand. They had spent my wedding budget on my twin sister. Allison is my identical twin sister, and we aren't exactly friendly. My name is 23F. Actually, I can't even bring myself to speak to her or my parents. Despite our history of mistreatment, we were at least on good terms for a while. However, I've avoided them for the past 2 years, and they haven't made an effort to reconnect with me either. By default, Allison is older than me because she is 12 minutes my senior. Due to financial constraints, my parents had originally intended to have just one child, but by the time they learned they were expecting a second, it was too late, and my mother was unwilling to take any chances. I quit attempting to convince my parents the day I learned about this from my inebriated uncle at a Thanksgiving gathering while I was a high school student. Giving birth to 2 children and then deciding that only one of them would be adored was the most natural thing that could have been done under the circumstances. The sibling rivalry between Allison and myself was ridiculous from the time we were children, but that was Allison and not me. I tried to outdo her at everything she could, thinking it would make our parents proud, but all it did was make them dislike me even more. To be completely honest, Allison's true motivation was never to prove that she was better than me. Rather, she sought validation from others by making it seem like she cared about our rivalry. I'll be the first to confess that she had a talent for manipulating others into thinking she was wounded when I did things better. As a result, many people validated her sentiments and tried to bring her down from their highs. My parents, a few of our relatives, and even a few classmates were among these individuals. To sum up, the competition helped me succeed academically and extracurricularly so that I could outdo my sister, while it brought her acceptance, attention, and pity from my parents and others because I was the one who was plainly at fault for making her feel inferior. Even while I don't think I would change things now, I wish I had rubbed it in her face more when it happened. It was also our 21st birthday 2 years ago. By that point, we had both earned our bachelor's degrees. I had attended and graduated from a highly prestigious business school in the state, while she had attended a more conventional university. In addition to being valedictorian and receiving a scholarship, my parents had saved a big penny for my education, which they criticized and thought was crazy. But I thought they would be proud of me. Their focus was solely on Allison and her future prospects due to her precarious financial situation. We had both returned home, but Allison was still desperately seeking employment while receiving rejection after rejection after rejection. I, on the other hand, was interning remotely at a corporation. That was more important to my parents than anything else, so they hadn't even congratulated me. I was disappointed, to say the least, but it was not surprising. I kept quiet about how I felt as I hadn't saved enough to leave my parents' house yet and was still living with them at the time. I couldn't do it after our 21st birthday, though. I was hoping they would do something special for us on our birthday, but I came home to find that nobody had been to celebrate with us. The only thing they had left was a letter saying they were going to the beach with Allison and her friends and would be back in a few days. Upon reading that email, I was devastated. They had treated Allison and her friends to a beach vacation, but all I received was a card wishing me a happy birthday and a gift card for $50. Even if my childhood had been unjust in many ways, there was the point at which I would no longer tolerate it. I immediately decided to leave that day and never return since their lack of compassion and disappointment was so overwhelming. I was fortunate to have a few friends who were more than happy to let me remain with them until I could save up enough money to buy my own apartment. I didn't have to worry about finding a place to live for long because I was very likely to be hired by the firm where I was interning once my internship ended. Thus, I was just looking for short-term housing, no more than 2 months. I uprooted my life and resided with a friend, completely ignoring my sister and dad, and I haven't looked back since. Also, they didn't actually beg me to return because they missed me. On my birthday, the day after I left, they did contact me, but it was not with birthday wishes. They wanted to assure me that they would be returning soon and suggested that I call a plumber to fix the faucet. In the hopes that they would respond, I informed them that I had moved out and was no longer living at home. However, this was in vain. Allison seemed unconcerned, and my parents appeared to be fine with it. The last time I had an adult discussion with a member of my family was then. I haven't heard from them or returned to visit them since then. The only way I was ever informed about Allison's life was through word-of-mouth updates from friends, but that was about it. Neither of them knew anything about my parents. The same was true for my parents. After 2 years of hard labor, I now have my own apartment. It may not be a mansion, but the flat is pleasant and located in a desirable area. With my wage, the rent is manageable, which is fantastic because most people my age haven't been able to get here so fast. Life has worked out well for me, and I'm grateful for that. I've done my best to ignore my relatives. Allison, as far as I am aware, is currently residing in California after being married to a businessman who is over 10 years her senior. I believed everything was fine with my family until my uncle called me 2 days ago to say that my parents needed me to come see them immediately after a terrible automobile accident. Since I certainly am not so callous, I made a beeline for the hospital in the blink of an eye. I learned upon their return that they had been admitted to the hospital a few days prior and were undergoing treatment for their wounds. Even though they managed to escape the collision unscathed, they suffered life-threatening injuries. My dad had this ridiculous belief, among the most ridiculous I've ever heard, that we could avoid going to the hospital entirely if we simply took better care of ourselves, so we never got health insurance. My sister had previously been approached, but she had informed them that she would not be returning nor would she be of any assistance. Our mother apparently didn't want her husband to think she was a gold digger, so she asked her wealthy son-in-law for financial assistance immediately after their wedding, which our parents found nasty. Seeing her parents in the hospital following a terrible car accident was another reason she didn't want to fly back. She couldn't just leave her home and her 2 children, her husband's from a previous marriage, to play happy family with her husband's family. However, she would not have been able to assist them financially with the expenses, even if she had desired to. Without her husband's support, she would not have had the means to purchase even the plane tickets back home, since she is now a stay-at-home mother to children who are not her biological offspring. That was my run for being the beloved daughter and the prized offspring. It was already frustrating that they hadn't bothered to contact me beforehand, and my parents' new request that I pay for their medical bills made it worse, according to my uncle. Clearly, it's a substantial sum, and I anticipate a protracted period of financial hardship before I am able to make a full recovery. I would prefer not to spend a fortune on those who have never loved or cared about me. Someone else will take care of them if I don't pay for them. I know they have other relatives. The only difference is that they will most likely feel more embarrassed to steal money from other people and will most likely have to return it much sooner than if they had returned it to me. I was led to believe that when they asked me to pay the bills, they assured me that I would get my money back quickly. For the time being, I just don't know what to do. I'm in a jam. I have 2 options. Either I embarrass my parents by not paying their medical expenses and have myself taken care of, or I pay for them, end up losing money, and then wait for them to refund it. To be quite forthright, I am not in the least bit interested in shelling out cash for them. I can't recall a time when my family and I had a good relationship. In fact, it's been 2 years since we last communicated. I don't have any need to assist them out at the moment because we're practically strangers to one another. Yet, doing so would imply that I'm no better than Allison, which is terrible. Is Ida's refusal to assist my parents with the medical expenses resulting from their severe vehicle accident acceptable? Hi there. First update. Not helping my parents was my decision. It was tough, but I had to do it since I knew their expenses would be paid and they wouldn't have to worry. The only reason they asked me was because they were being very self-centered and didn't want to bother their other relatives. However, I haven't informed them just yet since it's difficult to break the news to loved ones that you won't be able to assist your parents financially in the aftermath of such a devastating catastrophe. Reading the comments made me realize that I was still unconsciously trying to outdo Allison, even though it's been nearly 5 days since we met. I felt pressured to prove my superiority as a daughter because she failed to assist our parents. No matter how much I want to change myself, my competitive nature will always be a part of me. I agree with most of the comments that my parents' lack of health insurance is foolish, and I would have made sure my father obtained insurance if I had been involved in their life. For whatever reason, he felt so confident in his driving abilities that he forewent auto insurance altogether. They should count themselves lucky that the truck driver was at blame for the collision. Otherwise, they would have to pay for the vehicle repairs out of their own resources as well. regarding the matter of their financial situation, which many of you had inquired about in order to reach a verdict. I would state that my parents are well. They are neither wealthy nor impoverished. My mother works in human resources for a smaller company, and my dad is the head of sales for his company. Since they are no longer responsible for providing for Allison or me, I would think that their combined income is more than adequate to cover their needs. Neither Allison nor I had to worry about money while we were growing up, but it didn't mean we could live lavishly either. We remain in the center, but I still don't understand why my parents can't pay their own costs. They should just pay the bills themselves if they can borrow money and pledge to repay it someday. I also don't think I'll be able to figure out why after this since they haven't informed me. Second update. I informed my parents that I will not be paying for their bills. I finally decided yesterday that I couldn't ignore their calls any longer. I had to do something before they were discharged from the hospital. They'd been bothering me for the previous week. Thus, I returned their calls by explaining that I had considered their situation and had come to the conclusion that I did not feel compelled to assist them. It was to be anticipated that they took it quite personally and were really upset by it. Despite having fractured ribs, my mom really ripped into me and screamed at me. As usual, they accused me of being ungrateful and such. My dad abruptly ended our call after my mom finished ranting at me, telling me that I was no longer their daughter. Since I hadn't been their kid for quite some time, it didn't sting as much as I had anticipated. To be honest, I've lost track of when it was that my parents truly loved me. After I moved out, they disregarded me on a significant birthday and hadn't intentionally communicated with me or checked in with me for 2 years. Therefore, I will just continue living my life as I have for the past 2 years. And perhaps even longer. Because I have never had parents. Regrettably, this doesn't impact me as significantly as my parents had anticipated. After my parents' phone conversation, my uncle called to give me another earful, but I hung up after a few seconds since I didn't need anybody else to do it either. Whatever people thought of me, I couldn't care less about it now. After then, my uncle sent me a text message explaining that my parents had already chosen to utilize the money from the wedding fund and that they still had another family to pay for it. More than half of the wedding budget had already been spent on Allison's wedding, and what little money remained after that was squandered on a European trip. As a result, they barely had any savings left and were unable to cover themselves. Now we know the answer to that question. My uncle had told me all that to make me feel guilty, but in reality, I was relieved that I hadn't paid my parents' debts with my own money. It wasn't my fault that they had squandered their funds carelessly. It was also not my responsibility that they lack insurance due to their own irrational ideas. They might ask their family for money or burn in hell, but I wasn't going to give it to them. They had no right to any of my resources, including my time and money, beyond that point. Update 3. Excuse me, but I have something strange to tell you about what occurred today. Since most of my current friends have only known me for a short time, I don't feel comfortable disclosing any details about my family background to them just yet, so I haven't been able to tell them anything that's been going on in my life. Thus, my only resource is Reddit. In any case, I haven't had any contact with my folks in about 2 weeks. Allison surprised me with an unexpected visit a few hours ago, in the late afternoon or early evening. It was quite an undertaking for her to meet me, of all people, because I didn't believe she would know where I lived. However, one of our high school classmates informed her about the neighborhood I lived in, and she proceeded to ask around to find out. What I remember about her is drastically different from how she appears and acts now. In my opinion, the most noticeable change is how much more polished and sophisticated she has grown. I mean, she used to sound like she was in high school all the time, but now she acts much more mature and ladylike. Her style, jewelry, and even cosmetics have all seen significant changes. For some reason, today I felt as though I hardly spoke to Allison at all. Her appearance, personality, and every other aspect of her have all altered dramatically with the passage of time. It seems you can't pretend to be someone else while covering up your own feelings, like she did with her own heart. Without a doubt, her character and values have remained unchanged. I was taken aback to see her when she knocked on my door, but I was also intrigued to know why she had stopped by, so I chose to engage in conversation with her. After we made small talk, she proceeded to spill the beans about her life as a stay-at-home mom of 2 toddlers, married to a wealthy man, and how wonderful it was. Her only worries, she said, were her cuticles. Nodding courteously, I waited for her to make her point while she gave her tedious speech about how being a typical housewife was incredibly underappreciated. After about 15 minutes of babbling about her life, she finally got to the point. And I couldn't have been more impatient. Because she was encouraging me to do the same. Our parents had evidently been pleading with her to return to visit them following the accident, so she informed me that she would be returning here alone. They were more concerned with her presence than her financial support, so when she returned 2 weeks later, she thought she'd see me as well, allowing us to put our differences behind us. Everything has gone swimmingly thus far. However, she proceeded to gripe about our parents' apparent lack of self-sufficiency and how they were treating her new family with disdain. She lamented the fact that she had to leave her 2 young children in the care of their nanny in order to see them, and she despised our parents for forcing her to make that sacrifice. I'll never understand why, despite the fact that they are plainly not her children, she insists on calling them her kids. Even though I didn't ask, she went into detail about her marriage and husband. My guess is that her ex-husband married her so he could have some parental rights, but she deluded herself into thinking he loved her. He had been involved in the custody battle for a while, and his ex-wife was using the fact that he was a full-time businessman who didn't have much time to spend with their children as evidence against him. However, things turned around when he announced that he was engaged and planning to get married soon after the divorce was finalized. Allison boasted to me about how she had rescued those kids while telling me all this, but I couldn't help but feel that her husband had taken advantage of her. His lack of affection for her was evident when he asked her to marry him, even though they hadn't known one another for more than a year. It appeared like she was completely oblivious to the fact that she fell in love at an unusually rapid pace, particularly following a divorce. Maybe she was aware he didn't, but she was prepared to overlook it due to the large financial account, and she was content to play the role of a glorified nanny for her husband's children. She was already frustrated with her new family. A husband who likely didn't love her and 2 children who weren't related but were getting along swimmingly with their nanny. And she was fuming at her own parents for wanting her to be by their side after a terrible accident. The very definition of the phrase ungrateful would be Allison. I'm not a fan of my parents in general, but I couldn't believe she was criticizing them for being overly possessive when she brought up the fact that they had repeatedly turned me down for this lady. By the end of her stay, she informed me that she would be departing in 2 days. She backtracked on her commitment to spend at least a month with her parents, saying she was sick of hearing about the tragedy and how it had been the worst experience of their lives over and over again and that she wanted to return home soon. Because she wanted to avoid the shame of leaving her parents when they needed her most, she now wanted me to make amends with them and be their proxy. They probably didn't tell Allison that they cut me off again since I refused to help them pay the bills, and she had no idea because they almost never mention me or even think about me. She had to cope with our parents and had to leave her family, so she wanted to exploit my pity for them. She wanted me to be our parents' emotional support since she didn't feel capable of doing it herself. It was classic Allison manipulating her target, but I was too smart to fall for it. Furthermore, I was planning to avoid the confrontation that would ensue if I informed her when she was at my place. Thus, I just told her that I will try, but I am well aware that I will not. We both know that she doesn't mean it when she tells me to stay in touch before she leaves. In fact, I was relieved to see her go since she was an awful, egotistical, and tedious conversationalist. As she went on and on about her dull existence in California, I found it nearly impossible to speak. The plot essentially centers on her spouse, her stepchildren, and parties. She believes she's living it up, but I find it terrible that her husband doesn't love her and that her kids spend so much time with their mom that they're certain to prefer their biological mother over Allison. And I hear that they still do. That being said, it's alright since she made the decision for her life. I have decided that my family does not deserve any of my time, energy, or compassion. Therefore, I will live my life in complete isolation from them. If anything, today confirmed my suspicion that cutting ties with my sister and parents was the correct choice on my behalf. I just do not wish to be involved in their life. Their callousness and lack of empathy make it hard for me to believe that they are capable of considering anybody other than themselves, particularly Allison. The fact that I am even linked to such vile individuals makes me feel humiliated. Now that we've severed all contacts, I can rest assured that they won't be able to contact me for the foreseeable future. My parents and other relatives had already been barred for a couple of days, and I blocked Allison the moment she left. For the time being, I feel that my family won't be a problem. It would be very appreciated if they refrained from contacting me going forward. I am much better off without them.